Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to come out of politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the apparent realisation on the part of government that Brexit means, amongst other things, stripping popular British foods and drinks of certain international protections along two lines. And this is apparently all the EU's fault. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So we're back onto Liz Truss again. This is the cabinet minister whose job it is to arrange favourable trading arrangements with everyone in the world outside of the EU. It is Michael Gove's job to deal with the EU. Now, it isn't going terribly well for her. And the latest example of Brexit ignorance on her part is the issue of, amongst other things, I suppose trade wars would be one thing and protected status for food and drink would be the other. So essentially, there are some foods that are so iconic and popular in various countries that they can earn protected status according to where they're produced. So that means that other producers around the world cannot claim to produce it. They might produce it to the same recipe, I suppose, but they can't call it that. So Stilton cheese, for example, one of my favourites, has the status of protected designation of origin, which means that if you make Stilton cheese, and it looks like Stilton cheese, and it basically is Stilton cheese, but you can only call it Stilton cheese if it's made in Derbyshire, Leicestershire or Nottinghamshire, in part of England. You know, that protection is risked by exiting the transition period. It's not an inevitable consequence, but it is certainly risked. But the major row right now is not for Stilton, though producers of it will not necessarily be happy, but it's Scotch Whiskey. Now, whiskey is the UK's top export in terms of food and drink, and by some distance. It's not even close to number two. This, of course, also makes it specifically Scotland's most important food and drink export as well. Now, I wonder how many of the 2 in 5 Scottish voters that voted for Brexit thought that it would mean damaging their whiskey industry. And there's another reason why Scotch whiskey is all the talk at the moment. So essentially, the United States wants to gear up for another trade war with Europe. And it intends to increase tariffs on, amongst other things, Scotch whiskey. Now, Liz Truss has tried to suggest that she's winning the war for Britain on this by getting the United States to drop tariffs on shortbread, which is another absolutely vital export for Scotland. Oh wait, no, it's not. Now, they are agreeing to drop tariffs on blended whiskies, but not single malt Scotch. And Truss has tried to suggest in an article in The Telegraph, which is a pro-Brexit, pro-Conservative paper, that, well, this is why it's so important that Britain has its own independent trade policy. To which you're thinking, I mean, we can now, we're out of the EU, we're allowed to negotiate on our own. In fact, we are doing, and yet these tariffs are still being applied. These aren't historical tariffs. This is new. This is part of an upcoming trade war, which may or may not happen because it's going to coincide with post-presidential election, which means that, you know, depending on what happens there, depending on who's president, then they may or may not wish to carry on pursuing it. But if they do, they will be doing so knowing that the UK is not part of the EU anymore. So I'm not really sure how that makes sense. And another way in which I'm not entirely sure how this is supposed to make sense is when you consider, so whenever America tries a trade war with Europe, so I can remember 2 distinct times when I've been sort of politically aware. I'm sure there have been others as well, you know, and it's seeking to do so again. The EU, I'm always impressed with how clever they are, because normally what happens in a trade war between 2 large trading blocs, like the United States and the EU, for example, is one of them puts up tariffs on certain goods. And it may be designed to hurt the other side, or it may be just designed to protect their own goods in their internal market. And then the other side does the same, and it all carries on like that until Donald Trump backs down. But the EU are very clever the way they do it, because what they don't do is they don't go, okay, they don't say, what are the United States' most important exports? Right, we'll bang up tariffs on those, because that's a very scattergun approach. That doesn't necessarily, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to hurt the person who's making this decision, which at the moment is the president. That doesn't necessarily hurt the president. So what they do is they target the exports that particularly hit the most influential politicians. So when George Bush Jr., for example, tried to engage in a bit of a trade war with the EU, this is over steel, wasn't it? The EU applied tariffs that would hurt him and his family. In fact, George Bush moaned, "Why are you hurting my family?" That's actually what he said. You know, Florida exports, things like that, you know, where they're hitting the businesses and the centres of influence for George Bush Jr. and those closest to him. When Trump tried it, for example, recently, they targeted tariffs on exports that are produced in the backyards of senior Republicans so that they would put pressure on Trump. Trump's trying it again. And I have absolutely no doubt it will be met with the same clever, targeted response. And it's this focus on using tariffs to do the most harm to the party in government and the most influential members of that party in government that surely, I mean, I'm not a really close observer of these matters, but surely that's going to mean the same thing as it's happened before. Now, Britain, on the other hand, has nothing to strike back with in a trade war. Are we going to jack up, for a start, because we're a smaller market, so the exports that might particularly hit senior Republicans, have we even got the option? Because maybe we don't buy a lot of those things anyway. Certainly, you wouldn't expect we buy as much as the EU, so it wouldn't hurt as much. And if we don't actually import, many of those goods in general, we're hoping for good luck, basically. For that strategy to work, if we were to use it, we would need to import a lot of goods that happen to be exported from the local areas of very senior Republican politicians. Well, what if we don't? And even if we do, have we got the capacity? We're actively trying to ingratiate ourselves with the US for a deal. In point of this, Boris Johnson has gone a little bit quiet about Donald Trump. He's not really talking about it at the moment, but he is known to be ingratiating himself with Joe Biden. Not sure how that will work. But again, we are basically trying to get on America's good side. The idea that we're going to try and take them on in a trade war is frankly ridiculous. But like I say, weaponizing tariffs in a trade war is one massive problem for our exports that we are now in a much weaker position outside of the EU to defend against. But it is something that will hit us from time to time, whether we were in the EU or not. Although, of course, as I say, it does us more harm outside. But then there's the uncertainty of protected status itself. So in theory, what that could mean, if we don't have that protected status, is you could have Scotch Whiskey made outside the named areas of Scotland and still call it Scotch Whiskey. Hell, what would be to stop someone in Texas making it and calling it Scotch Whiskey? Now, the UK government reckons that it's going to have its own system of registering these products that meets WTO rules. Okay, normally I'd be quite happy that. Okay, good, we're going to have our own system, then it should be fine. The thing is, I'm not seeing much confidence in what is, after all, another Brexit system that has not actually been implemented yet when we're just a few months away from Brexit. From the industry, the industry is not going, oh, it's no problem. They seem to think there might be a problem. And although this is the government, that says, oh, we've got this system, we haven't got this system, we're going to have this system to be able to register these products. It is the same government that has said it's thrown a protective ring around care homes, that said we're going to have a world-beating tracing app in June, that said that we're going to have a Brexit deal arranged by the end of July, never mind the end of the year, the end of July, that said they had an oven-ready Brexit deal ready to go, there'd be no need for negotiating. That was the problem with trying to back Jeremy Corbyn. Well, he's got to negotiate with the EU. I don't. I've already got my deal. That was last year. Where is it? They also said, more recently, that their algorithm for dealing with A-level and GCSE results was robust. Are we really going to believe that iconic British products will continue to be protected because this government said so? And at this point, you just think, okay, great. Another major downside to Brexit. The hit to our manufacturing is, of course, already apparent. It's hitting our farming industry too, and our ultra-important service sector has a very bad outlook. And now it's going to damage the production of our most famous foodstuffs. But, as is very much the fashion right now, the government are also having the nerve to blame the EU. You know, not because the tariff issue is a consequence of the US starting another trade war with Europe, but because the EU are not doing enough to protect British produce. That's what Liz Truss has said. You know, let me run that past you one more time. Liz Truss, senior government minister, is complaining that the EU are not doing enough to protect British produce. Without a hint of irony. I mean, Brexit was all about telling the EU, we don't need you. In fact, you're holding us back. Being a member is a net loss to us. And Boris Johnson's Brexit, that goes further. His specific form of Brexit goes way further. He doesn't just say that the EU membership was a net loss to us, that there is no benefit whatsoever in anything to do with the EU. None at all. There's not a single bit of the EU that is in any way useful. For this reason, not only are we exiting the customs union and the single market, but also every single EU agency, even if that means duplicating a crapper version of our own at 10 times the cost. Now, as a little aside, I strongly suspect that we will be engaging with some of these EU agencies when it comes to it, but nonetheless what Boris Johnson is saying publicly is there is not a single feature of the EU that we want to be part of. To then say that the EU should protect us is a particularly tragic form of hypocrisy. But it is also a very Brexity form of hypocrisy because it follows the recent theme of Brexiteers saying that the reason things are going wrong with Brexit and the reason why things will go wrong with Brexit next January is because the UK is too weak to fend for itself. Naturally, they don't use those words. They go about how mean the EU are. They cry about why aren't they looking after us? I mean, these are the people who said that we were so strong on our own, so strong that we will hold all the cards when we leave the EU, that it will be the EU that can't cope without us. Truss said that the EU had failed to stand up for British interests. Now, I suppose people can argue for or against that statement if they wish. After all, how does a trading bloc that doesn't stand up for its members become the largest, most powerful and wealthiest trading power in the world, bar none? Of course, we are not members of the EU, and we have no right to expect the EU to stand up for our interests. Quite frankly, this has got nothing to do with a hard Brexit. Even if we intended to leave the EU with the oft-cited Norway-style deal, where we retain access to the single market and pay handsomely for the privilege, they would still not stand up for our interests as a default position. They wouldn't necessarily seek to ignore them, but they wouldn't stand up for them as the default. They stand up for their members, because their members, after all, occupy positions in all three branches of EU governance: the Council, the Commission and the Parliament. Even if we arranged a comprehensive trade deal with the EU, much as Norway have, for example, we would still have no representation, no right to involve ourselves at all. We could ask, we could say, well, we're a big market for you, can you do this for us? And maybe they would, but we'd have no rights, automatic rights to demand that. We would be paying for access to the market, not protection from the United States or any other trading sharks that we said we had the might to take on. Of course, if we had arranged a comprehensive deal with the EU, we would not be worrying about whether or not our food and drink would retain protected status, because it absolutely would. Of course, our specific interests couldn't be protected as well as individual members when it comes to trade wars, but then we're also too weak to take our own stance on that outside of the EU, as is being proven at the moment, because this is a trade war that hasn't even started yet. We're out of the EU, we're going to exit the transition period in a few months, and yet we're still going to be targeted by that trade war. How has leaving the EU helped in that state? But there we go, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.